Come, Holy Spirit, calm our minds and hearts, give us a word to heal us, and make us a source of healing to many brethren. As it happens in the liturgy of this very day, we have our eyes fixed on the beyond. We are looking towards the Alpha and the Omega, and therefore it's a good time to make a retreat to look at where we're coming from, where we're going, and how we're helping others to get there. So we have on this very day this reading from the beginning of the 19th chapter of the Apocalypse. After this I heard what seemed to be the great sound of a huge crowd in heaven, saying, Alleluia! Salvation and glory and power to our God. He judges fairly, he punishes justly, and he has condemned the great prostitute who corrupted the earth with her prostitution. He has avenged the blood of his servants, which she shed. And again they sang, Alleluia! The smoke of her will rise forever and ever. Then the 24 elders and the 4 living creatures threw themselves down and worshipped God, seated on his throne, and they cried, Amen, Alleluia. That is worship, and our worship on earth, as Sacra Sacra Concilium invites us to, should be something of that, this element of recognizing what were before and disappearing, and any usurpation of the throne on the part of the celebrant is akin to a mini-sacrilege, for we are taking the attention of the faithful, which belongs to Christ alone, the High King, and we are mystagogues called to invite people to come into a cloud of glory, not more of the same thing, more of themselves, more above all of ourselves. It's quite subtle because actually it can, bit by bit, enter in. We like to be centre stage. And that's why tampering with the liturgy is doubly grave, because we're disobeying the one that we're celebrating, and also because we're getting in his way. He can't bless fully that which does not bless him fully. It's actually quite relaxing and refreshing to be in a place like this where one just lets it happen, and one is carried by a wave of otherness, and one doesn't exist. Whereas when one is celebrating, sometimes one is so much aware of the people, is it not true, that we've got to be very interiorized so as to actually enter into a mode of intimacy with the Lord himself. In the eremitic life, there are great advantages with having the solitary celebration. It's the same, and yet it's wholly different, because genuinely there's no risk. It's just you, the angels, and the Saviour. And there are moments when one generally gets touched by what is happening, even actually in the hours of night, coming when the whole world is sleeping, into a obscure little oratory, a chapel, where you have the lamp burning next to the Blessed Sacrament. You have a presence suggested also by what is here, incense still lingering in the air. This is a different place. But then one comes closer, because in a small oratory one is close. One comes to a first cushion, which is the choir of angels, a huge number of them adoring invisibly for the presence. And then if one goes into the tabernacle exposed Blessed Sacrament, there in the night, one comes to a denser presence again, the Lord himself. So alone, it's very much an encounter, eyeball to eyeball. It's of the mystical order, and it's something which if one has on a daily basis, gives sense, balance, proportion, and perspective to all the rest. Whatever happens, if one has had those hours in the night, whatever happens, it's happened, and one is well orientated. That's why the devil knows full well, get the priests not to have the night, the early morning, which is the classical timing. All these 2,000 years of spirituality in East and West, the night, the early morning, the pre-dawn, they're the moments where intimacy would happen. And the devil didn't like it one little bit. So make sure that they get to bed late enough not to have it. And he's got them functioning very well, but with no intimacy. One can say, oversimplified, and yet not without a speck of truth, The secret of the interior life hangs on the tip of the finger of the alarm bell, where we put it. Now, having said that, there is that double pole in our life: gratuitous worship as these 24 elders just prostrate, recognizing, giving back his worth, because the whole ambiance of the contemplative, the purely contemplative life which we have in this monastery, especially in this monastery where night and day he is adored, is of that order. It's gratuitous. It has no need of apologetics, justification. God has his rights, les droits de Dieu. And therefore, as he is free to create as many angels as he wants in heaven, so on earth he is free to claim as many earthly angels as he wants. These nuns here are pure gratuitous praise, burning day and night, consuming themselves in sweet odour of light and warmth. So that's the way that the Church expresses its mystical angle. And a bishop knows that when he's working, for instance, in a missionary territory, that the Church is not fully established until it's got that mystical element there. And a good bishop will fairly soon get hold of whatever form of contemplative life will take root in a country. And by the way, mutatis mutandis, the same applies to a parish, actually, because in Ireland we have that, thanks be to God. In fact, when I got back to Ireland in 2007, I went to see the bishop straight away, and he said, just one of the first things he said actually, after saying, well, we've got a place for you, he said that the house is there, he said, well, in this diocese, actually, we have adoration in all our churches. So every church has it, and it's pretty true, one goes around, and it's not all the time, but there'll be a slot in the week where adoration happens, maybe, depends on how big it is, but it's happening all over Ireland, adoration, Blessed Sacrament. And it is a counterbalance to many, many things. And it's something which one can do. It's not that difficult. Of course, if you have a situation where you have many faithful, many people in your parish who are into prayer at all, it's a bit more difficult. One has to limit the expanse, but it can be done. The only thing is that you've got to be careful that it's well protected, because you can get things going on. The ideal way, but that's another question again, the ideal way is to have a tabernacle which is specially made, and then you're safe. Where you can have people opening and closing it according. It's more risky if you start actually making it available physically on the altar. Things can get out of hand there, but there are new tabernacles being made which protect the Blessed Sacrament greatly. That's what we have actually in the cathedral itself, in Mullingar, a tabernacle specially made where they have adoration, not just all the time, but certainly all day. That's just to say that therefore the Church's life, even on a parish level, is there if the Lord is receiving his glory from a local group, geographic area. He's not sure to bless that area. God is not outdone in generosity, so blessings and graces do come on an area where that is happening, and the devil doesn't like it one little bit, especially if it's nocturnal. And so if one has cura animarum, there are things that one can look at, certainly, and one mustn't presume that the people don't want it. It's not gimmicky, it's not noisy, but it's actually pretty efficacious. Anyway, that's to be looked into, because our life essentially is not doing, but encountering, and we've got to let people encounter. Otherwise, again, we're too noisy and we're getting in the Lord's way. Now, having said that, the other pole is that we are actually doing the Lord's work efficaciously, even in action. And we have, of course, the Lord's model himself. It has been said with regard to the pre-monstrous retention life, that it is actually something of the totus Christus, the Christus totus. That is to say that what it is, whereas the specifically monastic life sends to reproduce Christ in the desert, Christ on the mountain, the, shall we say, active life, purely active, although there's no pure active life, reproduces Christ preaching, healing, if they're nurses. The specifically canonical life would be that total life of Christ in which all the elements are there, ready for every good work. And it's something which is actually very precious to the Church, because it's anchored in contemplation, very much vertical in the house, and then available for what the Lord himself wants done. But something of that should be in any priest, because if there is not this anchoring of the being in intimacy with Christ, then again we're a noisy gong. So these two poles, and all the great preachers, apostles of history have also been friends of the heart of Christ. And the more that is the case, the more then they are also able to reap for the Lord, because precisely the Lord is doing the work. Now, we have just here typical examples of people who combine these two poles very well. We don't have to go further back than the actual New Testament itself. St. James, for instance, who we looked at just this morning, he must know that he who causeth a sinner to be converted from the error of his ways will save his own soul from death and shall cover a multitude of sins. That very act of being generous in our time is very meritorious, and if we're losing interiority in doing it, then it's not amply made up for by what we're doing for the Lord. Then, a bit further in time, St. John Chrysostom, one of the greatest preachers of antiquity, by his very name, which is a nickname implying the power of his mouth. He died in 407. The illustrious Bishop of Constantinople, one of the most important bishoprics in the world, and Doctor of the Church. Now he tells us this: zeal for the salvation of souls is of so great a merit before God, that to give up all our goods to the poor, or to spend our whole life in the exercises of all sorts of austerities, and he of course is going from a monastic background, he knew what it meant, cannot equal the merit of it. There is no service more agreeable to God than this one. To employ one's life in this blessed labour is more pleasing to the Divine Majesty than to suffer martyrdom, he would say. That's interesting. Would you not feel happy if you could spend large sums of money in corporal works of mercy? But know that he who labours for the salvation of souls does far more. Nay, the zeal of souls is a far greater merit before God than the working of miracles. And it's interesting to see how these great preachers came from the desert. St. John Chrysostom is a good example. Popes, Gregory the Great, 604 he died. No sacrifice is more acceptable to God than zeal for souls. Now, jumping in time, we come to Saint Vincent de Paul. He died in 1660, but he had a long life. He was only around in 1576. Now, let us give ourselves, he would say to his brethren, to God, gentlemen, to go to carry his gospel over the entire earth, and into whatever part he may lead us. That is, he may lead us, that's the point. He's inviting us and we're saying, yes, 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 send me, Lord. Now, there, let us maintain our part and continue our duties until such time as his good pleasure will withdraw us. Let no difficulties move us. Glory of the eternal Father, and the efficacy of the Word, and the passion of his Son are at stake. The salvation of men and our own are so great that they merit to be obtained at any price. Now, parallel to this, we have a little earlier in time, Saint François Xavier. He was down there in Asia, wasn't he? He was trying to get to China, and he was already in Japan, but he was writing back to Europe, and he was saying, more or less this: tell those people splitting theological hairs in Paris to get up and go, because there were people rotting in hell because they were too busy splitting these theological hairs and not doing anything serious with their time. We have an interesting aside here, because we don't often look at women for theology at this period. We have this gem of a quotation from Rose of Lima, Peru. who died in 1617, we read that her confessor offered himself to go to the missions, but he feared because of the dangers it would entail. After consulting the saint, he heard these words, "Father, and do not fear. Leave all to labour for the conversion of the infidel, and know that the greatest service that man can offer to God is to convert souls, for this is a work proper of the apostolate." Now, that's the point, you see. It's not building, it's not organising, administrating in itself, although that can be necessary to do this, but we must always bear in mind our work primarily is soul work, soul to soul. One soul is enough to give hours of time to. What greater happiness could there be than to baptize, be it only a little Indian child who would enter heaven through the gates of baptism? Jean de Brébeuf, St. Jean de Brébeuf, the Jesuit, one of the 8 North American martyrs, was heard to say, after pouring the saving waters of baptism on a dying Indian child, "For this one single occasion I would travel all the way from France. I would cross the great ocean to win one little soul for our Lord." And in these missions, they found that the Lord actually was working, as it were, overtime, because things would happen. And I've heard this too, because I was living with missionaries twice over in my student life, in Dublin and in Rome. And things would be constant in the genuine mission work. I mean, they're out on the front, in the bush, in Africa, where it was hand-to-hand combat. Miracles would happen, and demons would be put to flight. I mean, seriously. It was really quite demonic, some of the stuff they had to handle. But also this other thing of missions being blessed and made fruitful directly by the hand of God, miracles taking place before their eyes. I remember one time the rector of the house when I was staying in Rome, who was by then, he'd come by obedience to look after the college in Rome, Mary Noel, but he wanted to go back, and he's gone back to Africa, he wants to die down on the missions. But anyway, he came all his life to Africa, and he knew all about it, and he would come out with things. And this, he came out one day, we priests, he was saying, I think actually preaching that morning, we priests don't know what we have in our hands. He was saying how one day, this poor lady came with her dying baby, just like that. "Father, there's no hope, maybe just a blessing for this little child," because of course in those places they haven't got much in the way of medicine. So anyway, with great sincerity, he blessed this child and wrote to the Lord. And then he commented, "Now that child is a healthy young man." That was enough comment. In other words, God was listening. The blessing was the blessing of Christ the Lord, and we don't take it seriously. St. Margaret Mary, 1690, she died. "My divine Saviour has given to understand that those who work for the salvation of souls will have a gift of touching the most hardened hearts, and will labour with marvellous success if they themselves are penetrated with a tender devotion to his divine heart." Now that's one of the famous promises of the Sacred Heart. We have something similar in the update of it in the diary of St. Faustina. And there, that comes through the power of divine mercy, the power of the chaplet and so on, that we can actually touch the hardest of hearts. And I've had testimonies in writing or whatever about this. Things actually do move in those promises. That chaplet is actually quite powerful. 3 o'clock is very powerful in which to plug in. It's important that we actually remember these, especially in a Catholic country, when it comes to giving out penances in the sacrament of confession. That's a very powerful penance to give. Now, then one of the great missionaries, of course, is St. Anthony Mary Claret, who's preached an awful lot in his existence. He died in 1870. Another thing that spurs me on to preach ceaselessly is the thought of the multitude of souls which fall into the depths of hell, who die in mortal sin, condemned forever and ever. If you were to see a blind man about to fall into a pit or over a precipice, would you not warn him? Behold, I do the same. How often I pray with St. Catherine of Siena, O my God, grant me a place by the gates of hell that I may stop those who enter there, saying, Where are you going, unhappy one? Back, go back. Make a good confession. Save your soul. Don't come here to be lost for all eternity. St. Anthony resolved never to waste a moment of time. That's a good resolution in retreat for a priest. And during his 35 years as a priest, he wrote, wait for it, 144 books and preached some 25,000 sermons. On one trip, besides travelling, he preached 205 sermons in 48 days and 12 in one day. And on it would go. And then, coming closer to us again, we have the great John Bosco, who got his young men on side because he made himself one of them. He learned how to conjure. And he was able to go to the prison authority and say to them and barter with them, give me these boys for one day and I promise you they will all come back perfectly well behaved. And he insisted and he got his way. They all came out of prison for one day and a great time was had by all. And of course the way he was able to get them was he was able to say to the prison authority, they're all in a state of grace because he just heard all their confessions. So he had his way. And youth ministry is very important. To know exactly how to get them on side. Now, the motivating force dominating St. John Bosco, he died in 1888, his whole life can be summed up in this one phrase, give me souls, you take the best. And he'll go on, there is nothing more holy in this world than to work for the good of souls, for whose salvation Jesus Christ poured out the last drops of his blood. In his writings and conferences, he consistently pointed out that man is successful in this world if he saves his soul, and is very knowledgeable. Yes, that is the point. He was teaching these people, you see, therefore, that one is giving them alms to succeed, and the success is also in the world. And that was the basis, for instance, of the Benedictines in Britain, get the cream, and they would have influence on the rest of society. But he is very knowledgeable if he knows the science of salvation. But he is a total failure if he loses his soul and knows nothing, if he is ignorant of those things that can assure him of eternal salvation. And for that reason, I sometimes secretly say to myself, and I've got lots of these poor travelling people with me, the itinerants, I mentioned earlier, that these are more likely to save their soul than many a self-sufficient, brilliantly educated person coming out of what we call public school. Why? One is self-sufficient, the other has nothing. But you take him as he is, and he's honest before God and himself. We have the contact between John Bosco and the famous schoolboy saint, Dominic Savio, which is quite interesting. And by the way, you know Dominic Savio had a vision which was very interesting at the time. And I was in school, it was a state school, I was about 15 at the time, and I was beginning to have the intuitions the Catholic Church was the true church, but I wanted confirmation of it. And I happened to go into the Catholic Church, which was very close to the school one time. And in the back, there was this rack of booklets by the CTS, Catholic Truth Society. And by the way, the things that one puts at the back of the church like that are useful, because people do pick things up and they can speak to their heart when they're alone in the church. And the work is done for us then. Well, it was, this particular one, the life of this schoolboy saint. Being a schoolboy, and this boy being about my age, this is interesting. And what, through this booklet, answered my question was this particular vision that he had one day. He saw a great misty, dark field, a great plain, completely misty and obscure. and at a certain point appeared before him in this mist-filled field, plain, a person dressed in pontificals with a lamp, and around this lamp that he was holding, this darkness was being dissipated, and new light was coming. And he was given to understand this field is England over there, and he let Don Bosco know about this. And the meaning obviously was that the Catholic Church was about to be re-established. In fact, in practice, the hierarchy to be restructured after all those years of persecution. And so it was. But boy, was that a powerful one for me at that time. The Lord himself was through a schoolboy saying to another schoolboy, the true church, in where you are living, is the Roman Catholic Church. And by the way, it's not so simple in Britain, because the high Anglicans have all the trimmings. And one's got to be pretty careful not to be taken in. Especially when one's friends are Anglicans. My best friend was going to be an Anglican clergyman, and he was high Anglican. So it's difficult to dialogue with these people, because they knew a lot and they had a lot. But unfortunately, what one wears does not change what one is. And no matter if one has a big mitre on one's head, in the eyes of God, one is or one is not a bishop and a priest. Now, St. Dominic Savio, the thought of saving souls for God was never out of his mind. That's what John Bosco himself said of this schoolboy saint. He died, this little child, in 1856. So he, in a serious conversation with one of his companions, gave several reasons for his own, Dominic Savio's, apostolic zeal in saving souls. 1. My companion's soul has been redeemed by Jesus Christ. 2. We are all brothers, and so we must love each other's souls. 3. God urges us to help each other. 4. If I manage to save one soul, I also ensure the salvation of my own. Now, there's wisdom in that child which surpasses the greatest pontiff. That's actually a gem of a child getting it right, and by a child's intuition seeing what matters in life. And it's interesting, children do get it right sometimes by the Holy Ghost. I'm quite surprised sometimes with the gems that these children come out with when they're not contaminated. Now, Teresa of Lisieux, we know that she became one of the patrons of the missions. 1897, she died. We have only short moments of this life to work for God's glory. The devil knows this, and that is why he tries to make us waste time in useless things. And I repeat what I heard there in this clergy retreat we just had in Fatima. There had great lecturers talking to us, and a very good priest from all over the world, nearly 100 of us. But we had this good lecturer from Germany, a young priest, and he was very close to Cardinal Ratzinger, because these people would have done the doctrine or whatever. But anyway, he was warning us priests about this question of the danger of frittering away time on internet, because it's something which sucks in great chunks of time, and we don't notice it going through the tube or through whatever it might be, because one thing leads to another. And it's precious time, it's soul time, souls of others and our own soul as well. Our own cura animarum for ourselves. Parce anime tue, we must be merciful to our own soul and take care of it. That means intimacy. With that we need maturity, because the thing is this, one can calculate how to obtain much information in a short time by going to just what we want on the internet, whether it's Googling or going onto YouTube. But then the secret is, stop there! Because unfortunately one thing draws up another, and then time goes. So she has this whole teaching about the use of every single moment given to us in eternity. Padre Pio, now Saint Padre Pio, 1968 of course, time spent in honour of God and for the salvation of souls is never badly spent. Maximilian Kolbe, 1941, we have no right to rest as long as a single soul is Satan's slave. A mystic, Our Lord himself said to Sister Josefa Menendez, she died in 1923, "I am not attracted by your merits, but by your love for souls." I so much want souls to understand this. It is not the action in itself that is of value, it is the intention with which it is done. Now that is the basis of the hidden life of precisely Thérèse of Lisieux and these sisters here, that they are saving souls by, as it were, generating power in the national grid. It's the whole teaching of Pius XI in Umbratilem to the Carthusians. It is about the same period actually as he was canonizing Thérèse of Lisieux. This was probably slightly before then. It was after publication of the New Canon Law in 1917. And he has this whole teaching about the apostolic nature of the hidden life, umbratilem, shaded life, that it's actually what gives power on the mission field. So, that, and then we have another mystic closer to us again, Consolata Petrone. She had a life similar to what we have here. I think they had perpetual elevation there. She was a captain, I believe, but they had perpetual elevation. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. 1946, she died. "I prefer one act of love to all other prayers." And that we can do. In fact, the Angel of Fatima taught that. He made this prostration, and we have this short prayer. "My God, I believe, I adore," and so on. And this prayer for the conversion of those who don't do so is there. We can recite that. I have the instinct of doing that on the hour when I hear the bell going, along with Requiem Aeternam Dona Eis Domine and so on. That bit there, because that's indulgence. And if one hears the bell chiming at the hour, if one does that through one's life, by the end of one's life, that's a good score with regard to souls being helped, both living and dead. And also helps us to pause and see where time is going. Now, that goes on. Then we have near to us again, Pope Pius XII, who was an interesting character. I hadn't realized how interesting he was, actually. But that's another story again. "No one is permitted to be idle and lazy while so many evils and dangers impend, and while those who are on the other side are working so hard to destroy the very basis of Catholic religion." In other words, what I was saying earlier on, the devil is extremely awake and clever, and he's plotting all the time. He's got his full army in full army gear, and we're dozing happily and letting him get away with it because we're not speaking up. And we're to blame. Who are the best prospects for conversion? Listen to some verse. Vincent Ferrier, well, that's way back in time now. He died in 1419. He was a Dominican, wasn't he? "For whoever will proudly dispute or contradict will always stand without the door. Christ, the master of humility, manifests his truth only to the humble and hides himself from the proud." There's a case where I think it was either, I think it must have been Monsieur Hubert, that great confessor in Paris, either he or Vincent de Paul, one of those great ones anyway. It was in Paris this took place, and there was some precisely self-sufficient young man who came along with all the arguments and so on, and he came into the church, and then this saint was there in the box, I presume, and because he was in the box, he went in to find him. You say, "Well, well, actually, Father, I haven't actually come for confession. I've come for a talk." "Agenouillez-vous." Actually, I've come for "Confessez-vous, la foi viendra." Make your confession, faith will come. And he got him. Now, there's this interesting comment here. "One of the most effective and easiest ways to promote our holy faith is through the printed word." Now we make a jump. Now it's also through the cyber word. Because that's where we meet people, isn't it? I mean, it's there. When one thinks about it, if one looks at civilized society now, even as far as Africa and India is getting that way. Because at one point we had 7 Africans in formation when I was novice master. And they weren't long in getting onto our computer. They knew all about it and knew how to get on what they had an email down in Africa. They were into it already down in Africa. I was quite surprised. Anyway, so that's, you see how big now these screens are. And therefore, how actually hard one can hit. Now, the big thing is, you see, we could easily sit back and think, this is demon-infested, I'm not getting involved. Well, it's precisely what the devil wants. Get in there and combat where they are. So, these great saints of the pen, they are legion. And I would just finish with one little story from one of the ones I mentioned on this list. It was a great example for our time, St. John Bosco, because he was also, we forget that, a great mystic. We've already come across probably the strange vision he had of the church in the form of a great boat struggling in high seas, and it's brought to safety. There's one pope there at the helm, and he's shot down, but then another one steers it through between two big pillars. On the top one is the Blessed Sacrament, on the other Our Lady in the form of Our Lady Help of Christians, which is dear to them as a devotion. So they're the two pillars. When we find them, we're safe. If on the other hand we find they're being attacked, we know what's going on. So, John Bosco, now it's kind of important because if we have to do with young people, we need to know what he was shown, because he was given specific graces to handle these young people. And the order that came from him, the Salesians, is numerically one of the largest in the church. Now, he saw in one of his famous visions or dreams this broad road, hugely comfortable, and that's where sin, the easy way, is always interesting. It's there at the end of a needle. Sleep away in fabricated bliss. Obliterate. Now, he's going further. He notices that this comfortable way is actually leading somewhere. He notices in this strange experience that dotted on the floor are traps. He has the courage to look at these traps, what they're made of. Noticing my astonishment, the guide remarked, "Do you know what this is?" "Just some filmy fibre. A mere nothing. Just plain human respect." Seeing that many boys were caught in those traps, I asked, why do so many get caught? Who pulls them down? Go nearer and you will see. I followed his advice, but so was peculiar. Look closer. I picked up one of the traps and tugged. I immediately felt some resistance. I pulled harder, only to feel that instead of drawing the thread closer, I was being pulled down myself. I did not resist, and soon found myself at the mouth of a frightful cave. I halted, unwilling to venture into that deep cavern, and again started pulling the thread toward me. It gave a little, but only through great effort on my part. I kept tugging, and after a long while, a huge, hideous monster emerged, clutching a rope, to which all those traps were tied together. He was the one who instantly dragged down anyone who got caught in them. Now that's very, very modern. The traps are already in school. Try this. The first attempt. It won't do to match my strength with his, I said to myself. I'll certainly lose. I'd better fight with the sign of the cross and with short invocations. Then I went back to my guide. Now you know who he is. I surely do. It is the devil himself. Now, carefully examining many of the traps, I saw that each bore an inscription. Pride. We noticed the R is the little letter of pride. Disobedience. And it's difficult in a small family where children are the centre of the solar system to get obedience. They have a psychological means of getting exactly what they want. Envy. That, by the way, is one of the most powerful instincts in humanity. The green-eyed monster. You have the Othello. Beware, my lord, of jealousy. It is the green-eyed monster that mocks the one it feeds on. The sixth commandment. And children aren't slow in fiddling around with the cybersphere and getting sucked in and getting glued in, addicted until death. Theft. Gluttony. By the way, there's a lot of obesity around, even in young people now, because they're sitting all the time in front of a screen. And ancient games that come down from the Middle Ages are being lost in our generation because people can't play games anymore. I mean proper games. Anger. And so on. Stepping back a bit to see which ones trapped the greater number of boys, I discovered that the most dangerous were those of impurity, disobedience, and pride. In fact, these three went in together. Many other traps also did great harm, but not as much as the first two. He saw that many of his own boys were going in this direction. He couldn't understand because he'd worked so hard on them. He was given this message. Bad companions, bad books, and bad habits, my guide exclaimed, are mainly responsible for so many eternally lost. The traps I had seen earlier were indeed dragging the boys to ruin. If so many of our boys end up this way, we are working in vain. How can we prevent such tragedies? This is their present state, my guide replied, and that is where they would go if they were to die.